Okay, so we will start with the next topic. So here we will be discussing about AR Desai. Okay, so we already had discussion about this perspective in the previous session. We discussed about what Marxist perspective in detail. So you have complete idea about the perspective. The perspective that we are going to discuss is actually Marxist perspective. So if you see in the previous discussion, what we have done so far, we discussed about Indology, and we discussed about G.S. Gure, and then we discussed about functionalist approach, right? The structural functional perspective that we have discussed. So we discussed from the side of M.N. Srinivas. Now before also we have discussed about this particular perspective from Durkheim. So we already had this discussion in the chapter of Durkheim, and then we have discussed about M.N. Srinivas in detail in the previous session. So when we discussed about Indology, I've told you there are 2-3 different dimensions in which you need to understand Indology. So before 1920s, when we discuss about Indology, it was mainly the British administrators or British scholars for the purpose of administration. And after 1920, you can see that sociology established as the discipline in Indian universities, and in Indian universities sociology to be started teaching as a separate discipline. And then you can see post 1920s what, instead of classical Indology that we have discussed before, we started discussing about modern Indology or sociological Indology, right? And then we have seen some combination of approach like Marxological approach combining Indology with Marxist approach, right? And then we have also discussed about combining Indology with anthropology. So that's what we have discussed. So when the question is about Indology, you basically need to write maximum one paragraph about the classical Indology, where we have discussed about British scholars, British administrators, and I've given you the examples also. That is mainly for the purpose of administration. There was not much academic interest, or the academic interest in that context was very less. So academicians started studying the society, and we have seen the study of caste system, we have seen the study of Jajmani system, etc. by using Indological approach. And when we discuss about Indological approach, it's all about the culturological approach, right? And then in functionalism, we have seen that structural approach. So culturological approach means it is a bookish view what the system ought to be. If it is caste system, what caste system ought to be, right? What it should be. That's the culturological approach. And then we have seen what is caste system and what exactly is, what is the current reality. That is what the structural understanding of caste system. So that we have seen through functionalist approach, which mostly employed a field work. So when field view or field work is there, you will get the actual reality. You will get to know the actual reality. So in modern Indology also, it is mostly bookish view only, but some combination of approaches there. The perspectives was combined. Okay. So that's what we have discussed. And what's the word we have discussed here? We have discussed about that particular word, structural functional ethnography. What do you mean by that? I've told you this is the perspective, structural functional perspective, mainly from Emile Durkheim, plus in the Indian context, actual field study was conducted. And I've told you the reason for field study also. Post independence, there is a need for developmental planning. So you need to go for a functional approach. You need an optimism because welfare state emerged, and it is expected that the welfare state will take care of the problems of the people, poverty, unemployment, inequality, everything. So it will be taken care by the welfare state. So there is not much scope for Marxist perspective. I've told you when we discussed about modern Indology, there was combination of Marxology also, but post 1947 the scope of Marxist approach was very less. The reason is welfare state and the emancipatory concerns which were raised by Marx will be entrusted to the welfare state. So actually there is no role or there is no relevance for questioning the state policy at this point of time. Just emerging welfare state, we need some time, right? So some time has to be given to see whether the land reform is implemented, to see whether the promises have been implemented properly. So for that time is required. Immediately 1948-49 you cannot start criticizing the state. Although there are some independent studies were done during this time also, 1947 to 1960s also, some independent studies by using Marxist perspective conducted related to the policies and programs of the state, but still the predominance or the dominance was about structural functional perspective. And which approach? Structural functional ethnography. I have told you this can be a 10 marker, and I have also told you how to write that answer. Okay, so now when we discuss about Marxist perspective, now you can very well see the context. You know the context already. So what is the context? Around 1955, 1960, 1965, during that time, or mainly in 1960s, the various policies have implemented. Even Green Revolution also led to a lot of inequality. Some regions got the benefits. So regional inequality was created, income inequality was created. Land reform was expected to be something which is very good and fair and which is going to change the life of the people and will reduce inequality, all those things, but it was disastrous. Right? So because of these faulty implementation of policies and all, there is a need to see things in a different perspective. So there is a need which was felt at this point of time to analyze the policies in a different way. That's how the relevance of Marxist perspective you can see post 1960s mainly. So this is the evolution 1920s to 1947, mainly Indology, bookish view, but it was combined with some perspective. But before 1920s it was purely administrative purpose. Post 1920s to 1947, academicians, but Indology was dominant. 1940s there was a hangover, right? That functionalist hangover. We discussed about Parson and we discussed about Davis and Moore, and all this we have done already. So you know that functionalist hangover of 1940s, and most of the Indian sociologists at that point of time were actually trained under these people. For example, Evans Pritchard, Redcliffe Brown. I've told you yesterday that Srinivas have in his approach, the approach of Srinivas is actually a blend of his mentors like Evans Pritchard and Redcliffe Brown. So that functional bias was there on one hand. At the same time, welfare state, need to see everything in a positive way, optimism is required. There was no relevance for Marxist perspective, so the dominance was about the functional approach. And field study was conducted mostly and predominantly. Why? Because what is written in book and what is the actual practice is different. So you should be having clear idea about the structural reality. So culturological understanding gave way to a structural understanding with the with this particular approach, structural functional ethnography. For that, a lot of field studies were conducted, and we will be studying about all these field studies in the coming sessions, like village chapter of village studies. Okay, we will be discussing about village studies, and in caste system also we will be discussing about various studies. And I've told you about Sanskritization, right? So what was written in book and what is actually practiced is different. Sanskritization as a concept you cannot see in the Manusmriti or anywhere. That means Brahmins are always supposed to be dominant on one hand, but dominant caste concept will tell that Brahmins are not necessarily Brahmins. Like I have given you examples of other castes like Reddis, Kamas, Jats, etc. can be dominant. Secondly, in the book it is written that there is not written, it is understood that there is no possible mobility. Born as a Brahmin, end as a Brahmin. But what is the reality? Sanskritization is there, so there can be possibility of mobility even within caste system. Although it is understood as a closed system, but still there is some element of or some avenues of mobility is there. We have seen also in terms of hypergamy, hypogamy, or anuloma, pratiloma. Okay, so these are things which are distinct than what is actually seen in the book. So that's why field study was conducted, and field study also come up with different interpretations. Okay, proper understanding of Jajmani system, proper understanding of caste system, all this you can see during this time. Now this is a context for Marxist perspective, that you need a different approach altogether to analyze the policies and programs of the state. So that's the context of Marxist approach. And you know what is Marxist approach? It's all about forces of production, relations of production, all these words, keywords you know already, economic infrastructure, superstructure. So here also in Indian context, when he talk about economic infrastructure, what is the main resource? It is basically land. So entire relation is revolving around land. Like in case of Marx also, we have discussed in feudal system, everything was revolving around land. So in that context only, in Indian context also, most of the sociological studies were discussed and economic infrastructure as revolving around land. Okay, so it's all the same thing: forces of production, relations of production, importance to economic infrastructure, and other superstructural elements. For example, when even we discuss about this Jajmani system also, it is completely revolving around land. There will be a Jajman, will be a landlord mostly. Okay, so let's look into the approach. Let's look into the perspective here. This we have already done. Now, Marxist perspective. Marxist perspective of understanding Indian society uses basic assumptions of Marx theory of historical materialism. So I hope you have clear idea about Marx theory of historical materialism. If still you don't have any idea about this theory, now nobody can help you. Okay, even God can't help you at this point of time. That's the way we have done thinkers. So historical materialism, the same concept. We will be talking about forces of production, relations of production. Now I'm not discussing this. Economic infrastructure and then superstructure. All these are the main points that we have discussed. In India, it is closely associated with the historical approach. Marxist view found favor in India, particularly after the success of Russian Revolution. So from 1917, after the success of Russian Revolution, Marxist approach is there. This ideology emerged within the framework of nationalist movement in predominantly two forms. On one side, you will see the radical form and the liberal form. Radical forms are like revolutionary movement, okay, and in terms of Nehruvian socialism. So these are the two approaches that you will see pre-independence. In Indian sociology before independence, this perspective was used in combination with Indological approach. This we have already discussed. Marxological approach. D.P. Mukherjee used this Marxological approach, that is Indology plus Marxist approach. At the academic level, this perspective could not find much favor because of its radical nature, which never suited for colonial interest. So this was not taught much in universities. Academic level, this was not find much favor at that point of time because it's totally against the interest of the British. After independence, during the initial decade, a mixed model of planning was adopted with an aim to uplift all sections of population. Various programs and policies concentrated the aim of the sociological investigation to act as analytical aids rather than suggesting radical alternatives, right? So I've told you there was a functional approach, there was a field study, there was a complete optimism, all the emancipatory concerns which were raised by Marx is entrusted to the welfare state. So there is no relevance for radical alternative at this point of time. The emancipatory concerns highlighted by Marx were entrusted to the welfare state, and the initial faith on welfare state prevented the conceptualization of the contradiction between haves and have-nots, because it is expected that the state will reduce this inequality. There is no need of revolution or anything. So that contradiction at this point of time was not much was there. Even during this period, isolated studies, that means I've told you individual independent studies were made highlighting the contradictory aspects of Indian society. Some studies like Jajmani system, some studies on caste system, etc. were conducted even during this period also. Subsequently, the inability of developmental model in addressing the aspirations and problems of people led to emergence of alternative views for the interpretation of Indian social reality. So what is the context? This context is this: inability of the developmental model in addressing aspirations and problems of people led to an alternative view. Okay, so I've told you land reform was not successful. Even community development programs, the programs which were planned, the implementation was not successful. Inequality was increasing, poverty was increasing, unemployment is increasing. So much of problem, the welfare state could not implement the promises that have been made. Okay, so in spite of rejection of caste system by the constitution, it continued at the grassroots level. Poverty remained, and the dream of balanced regional development was distinct reality. Now this will be more when it comes to green revolution. Post green revolution, some areas will be getting benefit because of its typical nature, because green revolution needs certain prerequisites, right, with respect to irrigation, with respect to huge land area. So land reform had a big role to play for that, and irrigation facility also have a big role to play for that. So because of that, regional disparities, this I will discuss in detail when it comes to the chapter on village, green revolution, all these are different topics. Thus, During 1970s, the Marxist perspective of understanding Indian society was made popular in the writings of A.R. Desai. Marxist perspective aims or attempt to understand the society in the following way. So these are the main points that we already discussed in Marx. Exactly the same thing. It attempt to understand Indian society in terms of process of historical developments where society as a whole or its institutions have seen as evolving in terms of changing material conditions. So in the theory of historical materialism also we have discussed, it is historical and it is materialistic. So we have seen the change in material condition and society as a whole was evolving, right? There also we have seen how society was evolving based on the change in material condition. When we discuss about change in material condition, mainly we are talking about changes in ROP and FOP or in the economic infrastructure. So when that change, society keep on changing, and we have discussed from primitive communism to ancient mode of production to feudal mode of production to capitalist mode of production and then socialism and also communism. So this kind of evolution is what Marxian understanding, and that's how they are studying the society. And this evolution is through changing material condition. Okay, so that is what dialectical materialism. Contradictions are there, changes are there, material changes are there, and material changes are actually the reasons for change. Dialectical materialism. A.R. Desai in his book Social Background of Indian Nationalism uses a historic materialist approach. That's about the theory only, same theory only, historical materialism, to understand Indian society. Similarly, Daniel Thorner understands social inequalities in India and particularly in the agrarian social structure in terms of Marxian theory of class and class struggle. So if you remember when I've told you about the relevance of Marx, I don't know how many of you can remember that now. I've told you the theory of class and class struggle can be used. What is the relevance? It can be used to understand the level of inequalities which is present in the underdeveloped countries, mainly underdeveloped societies, right? So that application you can see in the study of Daniel Thorner. You don't want to know the study completely, but we will be discussing about this here and there when it comes to Jajmani system, village studies, etc. As example, not in the syllabus. The social structure and the institution are seen as rooted in productive relation. So everything is understood in terms of productive relation rather than understanding them in terms of cultural category. So what is this approach? Understanding everything in terms of cultural category. What is that approach? Indological approach, right? Trying to see everything. Jajmani system, cultural logical understanding. Caste system, cultural logical understanding. Here in Marxist approach, even the caste system is also kind of productive relation because that division of labor. Jajmani system is also productive relation because there is an inherent exploitation by the judgman. Okay, so more primacy is given to economic infrastructure, which you already know, while explaining the dynamics of society. A.R. Desai's famous work on peasant struggle or movement is a classical explanation of how struggle by have-nots can influence the political system as well as the government policies. Marxists see society in a systemic manner. This also we discussed under Marx, and if you remember, I have given you the diagram, systemic view of Marx. What is that systemic view of Marx? We have discussed, if you remember, that economic infrastructure, this is FOP and ROP, okay, then FOP and ROP, then there are superstructures, right? So this is the systemic view of society. This is the nature. This view was given by Fletcher. So that we have already discussed, exactly the same systemic manner, again acknowledging the centrality of economic infrastructure. So again giving importance to economic infrastructure. So here also, if you're criticizing, what is the main criticism? You are giving more importance to the economic infrastructure, ignoring the role of the superstructure. Marxist studies of village understand village as a network of socio-economic and political relation woven around land. So here in village studies, what is that economic infrastructure when you talk about? It's all about land relations, land equations, like what we discussed in the context of feudal society in Marx. Marxist perspective studies Indian society in terms of contradictions and conflicts. Okay, so Marx also do the same thing, more particularly after 1970s. This analysis highlighted the contradictory and the conflictual nature of Indian social institutions. The structural functional view about various institutions actually challenged. So this is how we do in case of Durkheim and Marx also. We can see all the understanding of Durkheim we can challenge by using Marx, whether it is family, whether it is religion. Durkheim says religion is functional, Marx says religion is opium of mass. Durkheim says family, 4 functions we have discussed. Marx says it is an exploitative device, it is making the individual a passive listener and preventing the revolution, making the labor force, etc. Right? So, division of labor, Marx says it is alienation, Durkheim says it is integrating and giving autonomy to produce. Exactly in the similar way, structural functional perspective will highlight the functions of caste, judge-money system, etc. Marxist approach will highlight the contradictions or the conflicts of that. So, for example, A.R. Desai challenged the harmonious character of Indian village historically as well as contextually. So, the structural functional approach is mainly Indian villages harmonious character, whether it is caste system or judge-money system, etc. All these are, providing the role of integration of the society. But that's not the case historically as well as contextually. For example, Green Revolution and land reforms were analyzed in Marxist study in a different perspective. Now, what are the criticism? Criticism is mainly the same we have discussed in the context of Marx. Overlook, on the functional dimensions, right? Integrative aspect ignored, given importance to conflict, macro approach, culture is not taken into consideration, importance to economic infrastructure, what all things we discussed under Marx, what all things exactly the same, but put it in Indian context. For example, you can see here, this perspective could not acknowledge the religion or culture as a central institution in India. Thus lead to inadequate explanation of importance of religion and various cultural categories while understanding Indian society. So it's not like what we have discussed under Marx, everything he reduced to economic infrastructure. That's why I've told you is a reductionist. But in Indian society, everything cannot be reduced at the level of economic infrastructure. These elements, religion, culture, what are they according to Marx? What are they? Economic infrastructure or superstructure? Superstructure. So they also have a very big role to play in the Indian context. Okay, so Indian society have to be studied on the basis of concepts of Indian society, not the Western concepts. Where we discuss this sentence? Indology. Okay, so that means you are ignoring culture. That is again a big problem. That is, you are not getting the complete understanding. Marxists also overlook the importance of caste in understanding the social structure and social organization. For example, actual social relation in India could never be understood purely in class terms. So Marx is only talking about class, Marx is only talking about economic infrastructure, but in India, actual social relation, even the class is also connected with what? Caste. Okay, mostly upper caste or upper class. Marxists also emphasized on conflict and ignored the functional aspect like joint family, village, caste system, judge-money system, etc. There is a integrative role for all these to play. This perspective was never found capable of portraying the total reality due to overemphasis on the material condition, or what other way you can put it, that Marx is giving importance to the economic infrastructure. But that's about this. Very simple. If the question is asked, must attempt, but what all things we discussed before also need to be accommodated from here and here, indology, everywhere you need to accommodate. What we discussed under Marx also you need to write. There's a very simple question, direct question will be asked, and this perspective is required more than that. The questions which will be asked in general, you need to use the Marxist perspective to answer. Any doubts?
So do we need to read book for this chapter?
This chapter, that's what. That's what I've told you yesterday, that you can read that book Nagla. In that also all the perspective is there. Okay, so all that perspective is there, and you can read different approach. From that you can get this also. It is the same as that of Marx. So if possible, cover all the thinkers. In India, pure feudalism was not there, but a kind of feudalism was there. A different version, like what you see in the Marxist approach, that feudalism, feudal lords, clergy, serfs, etc. is not there. But this is a kind of feudal setup when you give importance to the traditional relations, obligatory relations, right? When you're giving importance to this caste, Judgmani relations. This is what obligatory relation. This is a kind of feudal relation. Not in pure terms what we have discussed, but there is an element.
Hello, sir.
Tell me.
Sir, you have not discussed about the study of codes.
Study of codes, we will discuss in caste system.
Okay, sir.
Hello, sir.
Tell me, Praveen.
Sir, you have discussed about right now AR Desai, right? So it is totally about, I mean, not totally, we can say it is a Marxist perspective. So in the Marxist perspective, he has told that at the final, we have a communism where there is a stateless society and everyone will be equal. So this kind of statement or this kind of conclusion, whether AR Desai made with respect to Indian perspective.
I didn't get you. Please talk close to the mic.
Hello, are you audible now?
Yes.
Sir, in the Marxist perspective, he said that at the end we'll have a communism where there will be a stateless society and everyone will be equal, right? So, whether the same approach has been used by AR Desai with respect to Indian culture, like whether he has said the same thing that
not only Indian culture, everywhere Marxist perspective is the same. AR Desai also uses the same thing only. But mainly, when we study the village studies, here, when it comes to industries, the way economic infrastructure is understood in terms of pure class terms and the other material factors. But when it comes to village studies, it is feudal terms. That's what I'm saying, because most of the relations are woven around land. Even this Jajmani relation is also woven around land. Okay. Now, what you are saying is it's all about communism, socialism. That is applicable in all contexts. That is the Marxist perspective. That's a Marxist approach.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's about the first chapter of paper 2. We have discussed about the 3 perspectives, and next session we will start with village studies. Okay. So we will meet on Monday. See you guys. Thank you.